Cora, you've got a fantastic new article out on the Intercept.com, The Secret NSA Diary of an Abu Ghraib Interrogator. The article focuses mainly on Eric Fair. Uh, Tell us who Eric Fair is.
Eric Fair is a former U.S. interrogator. He worked in Iraq for a military contractor, TACI, in around 2003, 2004. Um, he subsequently went public with concerns about the interrogations that he had conducted and those that he had seen that he believed, amounted to torture. He wrote a book, a memoir of his time in Iraq and at Abu Ghraib specifically, that was called Consequence, and that was published last month. It was a great book, really moving, really upsetting memoir, and detailing the way that he and his and other people had treated Iraqi prisoners, and so he's become something of a whistleblower on torture issues.
And so when his book came out, what were some of the new kind of revelations, I guess, that we learned beyond what we had already known had happened in places like Abu Ghraib?
I think the point of his book was that, as he put it in another op-ed, that in Abu Ghraib was portrayed by the military and by defenders of the sort of system of the way that prisoners were the U.S. detention system in Iraq and Afghanistan and Guantanamo. Abu Ghraib was portrayed as this anomaly, these people, these bad apples that went too far. And his point in Consequence was that no, Abu Ghraib was not the exception it was not an isolated incident in a well-run detention system. He felt that systematically throughout the operations that he witnessed and was part of, there was a blatant disregard for the rights and the even just the humanity of the Iraqis that they were dealing with. And I think what was really interesting in Consequence for me was that he talks also about you really understand the sort of slapdash way that the interrogations were being run at the time. He described signing up to work for this contractor and just what a mess it was. Like, they didn't have the right weapons, they didn't have the right security clearances were being handed out left and right. People were misrepresenting their experience. Nobody actually knew anything about Iraq or about interrogations or about intelligence. He talks a lot about people that he knew for a fact were misrepresenting their experience, and he would watch them climb through the ranks in Iraq. So that was a really interesting aspect of the book. And then additionally, just he writes very movingly and very, forthrightly about the impact that the U.S. presence had in Iraq and the way in which people were being treated.
It's very interesting because some of these issues that you're talking about here, I remember that was back in the early days of Air America and Ring of Fire, and doing research and reading through these stories as they broke. A lot of the Abu Ghraib stuff, as you mentioned, was trying to be pinned on these few people, the people that you saw in the photographs. Names escape me at the moment, but it was their fault. They did it. This wasn't, systemic. This wasn't anything that they were taught to do or told to do or authorized to do. It was just a couple people who acted out. We're going to handle it. Don't worry about it. We don't torture. And then further along the lines, too, the issue of military equipment and security clearances. Those were things that we discussed back on Air America Radio back then that really got no traction at all beyond, the very progressive media. They weren't covered in the corporate media nearly at all, to my recollection during the time. And so it is interesting now to see somebody who was there, Eric Fair, to come out and substantiate what we had been talking about a decade ago. And so it is a little bit vindicating for those of us who've been covering it that long. But at the same time, it's also terrifying because we look at this and we say, well, now we know that this happened. And not only did it happened, to a far greater extent than what we even talked about, 11 years ago.
Well, I think, just stepping back for a minute, I think that it's interesting, the fact that Fair's uh, book is coming out right now, um, when the country is we're still having this argument about the efficacy of torture. We have, as you said, we have Donald Trump out there saying that he'd bring back torture, and he doesn't even use the euphemism. He doesn't even call it enhanced interrogation techniques, right? He's right up there saying, yeah, I'll torture people, which is just astounding.
Right.
And also, we just had a, slightly less hysterical, slightly more nuanced, but I think just as dangerous argument about this over the Senate Intelligence Committee's report on the CIA's detention and rendition program, which, was completed in late 2014. There was then a long declassification fight about it. The CIA is still arguing that it, misrepresents what they did, and it's still not. It won't be fully declassified. A court just ruled last week that the full report, which is 6,000 pages, it's been released only in a very heavily redacted summary, can't be, at least for now, can't be declassified in full. So we're still dealing with these things, and there's still a historical record that is, classified, that is many classified, and the Senate report did sort of bring all this up again, this issue of, people trying to argue for the, the efficacy of torture when, it's very clear that it doesn't work, and whether or not it works should be beside the point. So, I think that we're not done with this issue, unfortunately, even, more than a decade on.
And a lot of the problem has to do with some of these Republican holdovers that are still in the Senate, still in the House, that think that it's perfectly fine to use these torture methods. I'm fairly certain that, with the exception of Rand Paul, everyone on those early Republican debate stages was all behind what Trump had to say about torture. I mean, Trump may have been, the most blunt in what he said, but if you read the coded language of everybody else, they still believe the same thing. It's not like Trump is proposing any kind of new Republican idea here. They all like it for the most part. He's just the one that's, not afraid to come out and say it. And that's, a lot of the reason the Republican base clamors around this guy is because they think he's a straight shooter, when really he's just saying what the Republican Party has always brought us. Final question here. What do we know today about these policies? Do we have any suggestion that these have continued, or have we ended this, or do we know?
Well, I mean, certainly on paper, we've ended them. There's been a return to, officially when Obama came into office, but even predating Obama in during the Bush administration, there was a pullback of the techniques, interrogation techniques that were allowed, and to what's in the Army Field Manual. I mean, many people still argue that what's in the Army Field Manual goes, it could be argued as contrary to some of the techniques authorized there, like sleep deprivation and isolation, could still amount to torture in certain circumstances, and so there's still argument about that, about what's qualified. I think a big issue now is that we are increasingly turning prisoners over to, the Iraqi government, to the Afghan government. There's a lot of argument right now about, if the U.S. is taking prisoners in the fight against ISIS in Iraq, for example, who are those people going to? And what assurances do we have that they, are not going to be tortured by a partner government? And that's still a huge issue, and a really thorny one. And then, of course, the Obama administration has, ostensibly has a preference for capturing suspected terrorists, but as we know, they've chosen to kill most suspected terrorists that they're going after, right? So we have the targeted killing campaign, the drone war, and the in Afghanistan, high value targeting, which means that people aren't being taken prisoner at all, so they're being killed.
Well, Cora Currier, writing for The Intercept, keep up the great work. Pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.